Hey there, it's Kari at StudioR12 Stencils, and today we're showing you how to go from this to this amazing layered fall pumpkin project. So this is what we're aiming at today. We have so many layers on this project. We're gonna dive right in. We're starting with a base coat. But before we get into the base coat, a lot of times we paint on surfaces that are 1/4 inch MDF. This surface is an 1/8 inch MDF, so it's a bit thinner, it's a bit lighter. And sometimes it can also be a bit smoother than the 1/4 inch MDF that we get. So before I started today, I took a really light grit sandpaper and went over the MDF just to rough it up a little bit so that the paint would stick a little bit better to the surface. So we are starting with our base coat color. We're gonna start with the number 22. You can check out our paint color guide that we have that will give you the corresponding numbers to Sherwin-Williams paints as well as Deco Art paints. You can get that on StudioR12.com. I'll share the link for it below. And I'm also going to share with you a video explaining how to use our paint color guide. As we are base coating, there are a few things that we want to keep in mind. When you are working around the edges, you either want to pull towards you at the edge close to you or push away from you at the edge that's furthest from you. If you are pulling at that far edge, it can create a mess around the edge of your project. So we want to try to prevent that. You can fix it by going over the edge with black or the color that your background is, but we like to try to prevent that if all possible and just leave that cleanup mess not to have to happen. When you are base coating with a surface that has a rounded edge, it is very easy to want to go with the curve to do your base coating. However, we like to try as much as possible to keep our base coat in nice straight lines. Otherwise, you might see a little bit of wonkiness in your background, and we like to keep it nice and flat and straight. So for today's base coat, and you can see that when I mentioned that the MDF is a little bit thinner here, so this is the 1/8 inch, it's lighter. So if you are using a really light surface, be sure to grip it here at the edge, maybe even hold on to the top so that it's not moving while you are painting. For this project, we are going to stop right here for our base coat, throw our polyfoam brush in the water. Now, if you do not have a lot of brushes, you can always put this in a plastic baggie. We are going to come back to the cream later, so you can put it in a plastic baggie, wrap it up, come back to it after a bit. I'm just gonna throw it in the water bucket for now. And then we are going to do what we like to call wet sanding. I have a really rough grit sandpaper, and you can actually see that on the sample that I painted, I did this as well. When you wet sand, you don't wait until your project is dry to sand. This helps give you a really rustic, grungy look, but you are going to have to change your sandpaper a little bit more when you do this because the wet paint sticks to it. So we're just going to go through our sanding, dig in nice and deep. Also keeping in mind that we are sanding in the same direction that our base coat was painted. Whoop. So it's still going to be a little tacky and gummy. You can, at this point, get your hairdryer out and blow off a little bit of this if you wish. I'm just gonna dig in a little bit deeper. So now we have a nice, cute little rustic pumpkin. If you want a more bold background, then you're going to add 2 or 3, potentially even 4 layers. But we like to have the 1 layer for our base coat if we're going with something rustic. Now this is not dry yet. It is still cool to the touch, which is one way you can tell if it's dry. The other way is if you put your hands down and they come out with paint on them. So I'm gonna blow dry this to get it nice and dry and not cool to the touch. So now that we have our rustic background, the next step of this project is going to be to add our buffalo check background. The cool thing about our stencils is that most of them come in several different sizes, ranging from small and then graduating up to super large. And one thing that you can see about this stencil is that with the size, we increase the size of the stencil and we increase the size of the pattern, which is super fun because then depending on what look you're going for, you might want a smaller buffalo check and then use the small stencil and repeat it. Or if you want one of the larger buffalo checks, you can grab one of the larger stencils and then make your way around with it. Today I'm using our largest buffalo plaid stencil that we have, and you can also tell that this stencil has been well loved, well used. Our stencils are reusable, they are washable. We have a video on how to properly wash your stencils, and this includes getting paint and glitter and all kinds of junk off them. So as I'm laying this stencil down, you can see that it doesn't go all the way across my surface. I prefer to have a stencil that goes all the way across my surface so that I do not have to repeat, but today we are going to repeat and I'm going to show you how to do that. So we are going to grab some sticky stretchy tape. We like to tape our stencils down in two places. So I'm going to tape it here at the top since we are offset to the left, and then I'm also going to tape it over here to the right where we're not painting our pattern. This is going to help prevent our stencil from moving. Now, since we are only doing a little bit of buffalo plaid on this project, I'm not going to focus on painting it in the center. I'm just going to paint it around the edges, maybe work it in just a little bit so that I know what I want is going to be covered, but then I won't have to work as hard in the center getting that buffalo plaid cover. So for our buffalo plaid, we are using the number 49 paint, and we are using a piece of scrap mylar as our palette paper. So we used to offer palette paper and then we couldn't get it anymore. So we just decided we were going to use extra scraps, and it has worked wonderfully. You can get them on StudioR12.com. They come in long sheets and then you can cut them to suit your size. You can also wash them just like you do with the stencils. So we got a little bit of paint on our brush. We came over to our paper towel and offloaded, meaning we swirled or wiped 10, 15 times to get the paint off. When you are stenciling, you want a really light, dusty layer of paint. Stenciling is a layers game. We often get people tell us that they don't like stenciling because it's messy and they bleed under. And one of the main reasons that happens is because they are not offloading and they have way too much paint on their project. So let's take a look here and see how this is going. All right, so really nice and light and dusty. Now with the buffalo plaid stencil, there's a lot of little lines. And there's a lot of places there can be a lot of places for movement. So what I like to do with this stencil, you might notice that I'm just moving my hand around with it and holding down on some of the stencil. Even though we have it taped down, this is still a really large area. So we like to just give it a little bit extra security so that it doesn't wiggle. For this project, we're going with a really light, dusty background. So we are only going to do one layer here. However, if you were wanting a bold buffalo check, then you would let this dry and you would leave the stencil where it is and go ahead and do 2 or 3 coats. And then you will be sure to have that nice, bold pattern that you are looking for. We have several videos on buffalo plaid for you to watch. It's one of our probably most popular background stencils, and we like to use it through all the seasons. So now we're going to take the stencil off. You can see where we have our buffalo plaid. And then I'm going to move it over. So this is how you repeat your stencil. I am lining up the pattern with our line checks. Then we're gonna go ahead and tape this here. I'm gonna tape it to my table since it's off the edge, and then we're just gonna pick up where we left off, painting this one little area over to the side. Now, if you can see my palette, I have entirely too much paint for this. I could have done a very small amount of paint, but I got a little excited. It came out faster than I wanted. So we have a little bit too much paint, something you're gonna wanna keep in mind when you're putting out your paint. It's easier to add to it than to take it away and waste it. So now, I think that is good to go. I'm going to pop my paintbrush in the bucket, put my stencil over here, add it to my pile of stencils that need washed. And I'm just gonna kind of look here and make sure that when I'm looking at this background that I actually have enough covered. And I believe that I do. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce you to one of my favorite stencils that is probably one of our most underrated stencils. As a stenciler, I'd always seen these projects where you would have the background a color and then a color over top of it, and then the stencil portion would be in the color of the background. And I could never figure out how to get that reverse stenciling. And then I realized we already had the tool to it. Welcome to our circle stencil. So what this is going to do is it is going to let you paint the reverse. So on this project, which we have a video for, we have our white background. Then we used this circle stencil to paint navy and then use our stencil in white so that it's the same color as the background. So this stencil allows you to get a bit of a reverse on your projects, which is a really, really, really cool look and effect, and just something a little bit different. So now we have our stencil lined up. You can use a T-square to measure and see. It kind of is a ruler for artists. You can put it up against the edge of your stencil and measure how far on each side this goes in. So it looks like we are a little bit to the right, just a smidge too much. So now we are going to come to the center. Our center is going to be this nice big pop of cream. Now there are some little techniques that I do want to talk about when painting the inside of this so that we don't bleed under. It is really, really, really easy to bleed under once you are painting such a large open area and then you have a stencil, because you're going to be using, potentially, there's a lot of different options. I like to use the polyfoam brush here. However, I can't use the polyfoam brush around the edge of the stencil, otherwise it's going to be a mess. So what I like to do is use our jumbo dauber or our ink sweeper to get the edges of this project. So we're going back into our number 22, our cream, and I'm going to fold over my paper towel because we're going to use our paper towel for this. We're going to use our jumbo dauber. You can put your fingers right inside of it, scoop up some paint on your jumbo dauber, and then come over here and pat off just like we did with our dome brush. And then come around the edge here and dab nice and slow. Since we offloaded with our jumbo dauber, we're not going to get that mess and bleeding under. But what this will do is it will take a little bit of time and patience to get around the edges and get it as bold as we want, especially since we are painting a cream over top of a light blue. So you'll go all the way around your edge here, both sides, and then to do the center, we're going to pick up our paint on our polyfoam brush and do it nice and quick here. However, we are going to want to make sure that we stay away from those edges where the stencil gets a little close so that we don't risk bleeding under. So I'm going to go around my edges, I'm going to paint my center, I'm going to do 2 layers and then come back to you. So as I continue to layer my center coats here, there are a couple things to keep in mind. So once again, just like we did with the background, we want to keep nice, straight base coats. And that can seem tricky when you have a round circle that you're painting, especially when you don't want to make a mess of the edges. So what I've done is I have just come to the center and painted as close to that stencil edge as I can, and then grab the jumbo dauber. And you can go in as far as you want with the jumbo dauber. You can come all the way into the center and help get this base coated and get it covered. The reason that I did a mix of both was because if I did the entire center with this jumbo dauber and had to do 2 or 3 layers, we would be here for days. And so the polyfoam brush helps with the majority of the base coating and taking a lot of our tedious time away from it. But the jumbo dauber helps with keeping it clean. So having a variety of tools in your toolbox is really helpful. So now I have this pretty well base coated. I am going to be sanding through it when I'm finished, so that will help even out a couple little spots. Since we have our rustic background here, I'm gonna kind of pull that in throughout the project, so I will be scaling this back a little. So one tip, when you have something like your jumbo dauber, as soon as you're done with it, you want to put it in your water bucket. It will tend to want to float this way. So if you put a paintbrush in upside down, you can sink that over in your bucket and then keep it wet. So let's take a sneak peek underneath our stencil. And that looks pretty good. I'd say that's probably the best I have done with doing this line. Now, you can always peek under your stencils. I didn't peek for a really long time because I was scared I wouldn't be able to get it back lined up. But peeking is the best way to catch your mistakes. We have a video on 5 ways to fix your stenciling mistakes. And one of them is water and the other one is time. So being able to peek and catch those as you do them will really save your projects. So I'm gonna take a quick blow dry to this and then we'll hit our next step. So when I did my blow drying to get this base coat dry, I kept my stencil on. And that's because I'm going to leave my stencil on when we go to hit our next step. So our next step is going to be to add our banding around the circle that we have. And you wouldn't necessarily have to do this, but since we went with the really rustic background and then the really bold center, I feel that it's just too contrasty. So what that banding will do is kind of pull it in together and take away some of that really bold contrast. So are you ready for our next cool tool? These are our round banding stencils. We have a whole set of them. They come in odds or evens, so depending on the size of your surface and the size circle you're going to want to paint, they go from, let's see, 5 inches all the way up to 19, and then 4.5 inches all the way up to 18. So those are most of the standard sizes, and we have them in odd and even, and then we also have different widths. So we have the really skinny going up to thicker ones. So this is a super cool tool as well for wanting to paint your banding. So how to use this tool? I am going to, once again, use one of our daubers here. And I'm going to, so how I did this originally was wrong. I grabbed one of these. You can see I originally did it in a lightish gray color. And I put it down. Oh, there's one of my rings. I put it down on my surface and I was like, oh, look, that fits great. Well, then I started going around and you can see, once I start up here, it looks like it fits great, but then I go around and it doesn't fit. The band is going over top of my stencil. So when I originally did this, I didn't leave my round stencil down. So then my banding got all wonky. So how to figure out what size band you want is to you can measure it with your T-square. So this band here is 11 inches on the inside. So then you go to your banding and you find the 11-inch band in whatever size that you want. Line it up with your stencil. The reason we're leaving the stencil on is so that we know exactly what curve to follow, and then we don't get any bleeding either way of our white or our gray. Because if you start to do your dark banding over top of your white and you don't line it up and then you have white peeking out, it is going to be a tedious mess to clean up. So then what we'll do is we will move this all along. We have a hole right here in the center. You can put your finger down on it and then move it along, and it is a perfect match from start to finish. So let's show you how to use this banding stencil when you're painting. I'm going to grab another piece of tape because there are several little dots here. And when I did my original one, I didn't notice them, and I ended up ghosting a little bit, which means getting paint where you don't want it. So I have all the little dots covered up, and then I'm also going to use some tape and mark off here this next little banding area so that I don't happen to ghost down either. Okay, so we have this super cool tool. It's called the Multi-Masker. It is made from Mylar. You might notice that we do quite a bit of stuff in Mylar. We have our palette, we have our tools, we have our Multi-Masker, and we used to tape down everything. And if you have had to mask by taping down, you know how sad and time and painstaking that can be. So we made this Multi-Masker, which has a bunch of different shapes, and you can butt it right up against where you are painting, and then you don't have to worry about that bleeding or ghosting. But since we are going to be moving this quite a bit, I am going to just mask off with my tape. I am going to grab another piece of tape, and this is going to be personal preference. So we are only painting this really small area. So if you feel confident that you can hold it down and paint, you might not necessarily have to tape down because we're going to be moving it, but you can still tape it down to your stencil or to the surface. So we're going to go into our number 13, our gray color, to paint our little border here. You could also do a mix with the number 49 and with the gray to bring those colors in together. I did that originally on the first project. On this one, we're just going to do the gray and see the difference of pulling that color in versus bringing this by itself. So we're going to go into our ink sweeper, and I chose this one rather than the round one because it really just matches up with where the curve of our stencil and the shape of our stencil. So once again, we're going to come into our paint and we are going to offload onto our paper towel. Now, you are going to want to stay away from these edges, and I'll show you why. So we're going to do our little dabbing all the way across. Now this stencil has not been cleaned in a while, and it has a little bit of paint buildup. So that's how you know when you will want to clean your stencil, is that it starts getting some little boogies that are coming into your stencil area. So I have a nice even band all the way across here. I stayed away from my edges. Let me show you what happens if you get close to your edge. You paint all the way over to your edge here. I need to get a little bit more paint. If you paint all the way over to this edge, then you are going to get a really harsh line. See how harsh that line is? So then when you go to move your stencil, put your finger in the pinhole, slide it right around. Make sure it stays lined up. You can line it up with your top stencil and with where you stencil. So I'm going to come over here to where that harsh line is, and I'm going to overlap it. I'm going to get a little bit of my paint, come back over here, hold it down, and start painting. So see where we had that really harsh line? That is really, really hard to feather and cover up. So I'm going to have to take a blow dryer to this, get it nice and dry, and then do another layer to make sure that it looks nice and smooth. Okay, so I've done 2 layers here where we did that harsh line, and look, you can still see the harsh line. So we could do another layer or 2 to get that harsh line covered up. However, since this is going to be more of a rustic project, I don't want that super bold. So what I will do is when I come to the end, I will go back through and sand it gently so that it can get cleaned up a little bit and blend a little bit better. So one thing I am noticing is that I do have a little bit of a lip here where my circle stencil is. So I'm gonna start being a little more careful when I come over here to offload and doing my pouncing off here on my project to not apply as much pressure so that I don't cause a mess with my stencil and cause bleeding under where I don't want it. So now that I'm toward the bottom of my project, I'm having a harder time getting to it. So I'm actually going to twist my project around and start coming at it from the bottom to the top again, from the top to the bottom toward me, just because that feels more comfortable to me as I am stenciling. And I have kept, intentionally, I've kept this a little bit wonky and getting some edges here so I can show you how to clean them up. And the more layers you do, the easier it will be for those to kind of disappear. If you are looking for more bold banner around this or a border, then those will be easier to after layer. However, when you are doing this, if you're going to be doing multiple layers, you will want to do it all at once. So you'll want to do 1 layer, blow dry, do another layer, blow dry, do another layer, blow dry until you get it where you want it, because it is really hard when you are moving this around. I got a little bit off down here on this portion, so it does kind of look wonky, but we will sand through that and line it up a little bit better. So we're almost done here. This does take some time, but I think that what it adds to your project is really, really cool. And it's one of those things that, like with the reverse stenciling, I could never figure out until I ran across this tool. Since we are just doing light layers, I am moving my stencil rather quickly from banner to, or from space to space. However, that can cause a mess. So if I am moving my stencil and laying it back down on a place that still has wet paint, when I get up to move it again, there is a possibility that you're going to have wet paint on the back of your stencil, which can cause a mess on your project if you're going to be dragging it through. Okay, so let's take a look. We have our nice cool banner. However, it does look really patchy. So let me show you how to fix that. I'm gonna finally take this off, and you can see we have our cool banner, but you can't see that it did kind of not super line up as well as it did with my other project that I did. So our sanding is going to help that as well. And then I'll also show you another tool that you can use to help clean up that edge if you do run across it. The first thing we're going to look at cleaning up is the inside here. And we are going to grab our handy dandy click eraser. So this is a PVC eraser. It doesn't work if you just bring it to your project dry. However, if you get it wet, you can lick it or you can put it in your water bucket, and you take it over here to your paint you can, look at that, erase that right up. However, you only have a few minutes after you paint to do this. So that's why it's important to peek, because then you'll be able to get in here and clean up anywhere that you would want to clean up. Okay, so now we have that done. I am going to come through here with a sanding block, clean up some of these edges and show you how to do that. So we have our two different sanding blocks. We have a really light grit. We also have our rough grit that we used earlier. Now you will want to be mindful that if you are doing your wet sanding and you have a project that has red, and then you go to a project that you're using white on the background, there's a chance that that red paint can jump off of here onto your background. We've also run into this we've used black paint and we've sanded through black and then forgot to look at it, gone to a white project, and then there is gray or black on our project. So always be mindful of looking at your sandpaper. So we're coming into here and we are just gonna go right over top of our banding. So then that kind of pulls it back a little bit. You can come right into the spots where you have the little overlap lines, and you can just do a little bit extra there to help feather it and fade it in. So you cannot really see anywhere through this project where that happens. However, if you are wanting a really bold little border around here, then you are going to just want to be super careful as you are painting it and not rely on that sanding process. So if you want to clean up here around this edge where it looks like the little gray portion got pulled down a little bit, we do have a couple of really small brushes that you can go in, get a teeny tiny bit of paint, and then just come around here where that white is peeking out and just do a little bit of cleanup there and just hand paint that. You could also put your stencil back down and pull it over to this edge. So if I see that right here is where I want to go, I can put that stencil down and just come right back over here and feather this in, kind of color it in a little bit with my little paintbrush, and then it mutes that and covers up where that white is popping out. All right, so I'm gonna go in just a little bit more with my sandpaper and really pull it back a little. On this one, I decided I'm gonna do it just a little different since we didn't put that blue in there. So this one you can tell does have a little bit more of a blue tint, which kind of pulls it together. But with this one, we are sanding it a little more and kind of just fading all of it into the background. Now, one thing you will want to keep in mind as you're sanding this is when you're sanding it, you are pulling the paint up. So here, where we have painted the cream over top of the buffalo plaid, the cream is starting to come up and you can see a little bit of the buffalo plaid beneath it. So if you don't want that, you are gonna have to be a little bit more careful with your sanding so that that will stay as bold as what you want it. All right, next step is to get into our stenciling. So when we were trying to decide what we wanted to do with this project, I pulled several Thankful and Blessed and fall stencils. There's a leaf and berry stencil that you could put down here and paint a little bit of these around your border. With this, depending on what size circle you have painted, will determine the size of the stencil that you want to use if you're using a circle and a border stencil. So sometimes you might have to finagle those a little so that they line up just how you want them. So then we also looked at our Grateful, Thankful, Blessed stencil, and I was going to use this and just leave the border off of it since we already have a border. and then just use the text. However, we recently did a video on gold foil and I was in foiling mode, and once I saw this and I decided that we were doing the and we were gonna make it nice and bold with foil. However, as we learn, as we are doing our practices, I didn't take into account when I cut this stencil that I was going to be painting that inside band. So painting that inside band took my circle, which this stencil fit in perfectly, and shrunk it. So because of that, I'm having to move my stencil a little bit. I sometimes think, oh, you know what, that doesn't fit, I'm just gonna throw it out and go find something else. However, I wanna show you how you can still make this work on your project. So we got our thankful and we just moved it down just a smidge so that it fits in right inside that circle. Coming back into my tape, I'm gonna tape my project down on two sides once again so that it doesn't move. However, the only thing we are going to be painting here is the thankful, and then we're gonna take a little bit of a break. We are using number 72 here for our navy blue. It's just got a nice dark navy. It'll add a little bit of pop to this. I'm gonna grab a new paper towel. Grabbing a dome brush. We love the dome brushes when it comes to stenciling because of the shape of the dome. If you have a flat brush and you are coming into your stenciling, you can increase the chances of bleeding under because all of the bristles are touching your project. With the dome brush, the only thing that's touching the project right now is the very tip of this brush, just that portion that is domed. I'm doing a swirling motion here, just nice and light. You can hardly, I mean, you can see that there's blue on here, but it's definitely not super bold. The beauty of doing this swirling and having this as a layers game is that since we just put a little bit of paint on here, once I get to my L, this T is already dry. So then I can come back into my paint, wipe off again. If you want to make sure that you have enough paint off of your brush, can come in here, you can wipe off, come to your hand, and I can tell that that's wet. If I can see that it's wet on my hand, that means I have too much paint on my brush. I'm gonna come back to my paper towel, do a little bit more, and then come back to my hand, and look how that's just a light dusting. That's what we're looking for. So we're gonna come back into our project and come back into swirling. Now, you could also do the stippling motion, which is a tapping, and that is what I did on the practice project that I did. So I was trying to see what the difference would be between the stipple and the swirl. I like stippling because I feel like it covers more ground quicker. I also feel that it can help make your project a little more bold. I like to have really bold projects. I say that as I have a really rustic project in front of me, but most of the projects that I paint, I really like to have that bold look. But when you do stipple, you can increase your chances of bleeding under because you have more paint on your brush. You are applying a lot more pressure and pushing the paint up into your brush so more paint is staying there. So on this one, I'm going to swirl only, and then when we are finished, we'll be able to see the difference of what it looks like stippled versus what it looks like swirled. So this is my third layer of swirling. You can definitely see the difference as you add each layer and how each layer just gets a little bit more bold. So let's take a peek, and that is perfect. Okay, so now the next step. Unfortunately, since we had to move our stencil, we can't just do our thankful and blessed, leave it taped down and make it easy peasy. But that does give us some room to play. So when I originally painted this, I did the thankful, I came down to the and sign, and then I painted the blessed. However, I did learn that after I put the stencil down, after I'd foiled, it kind of rubbed it a little bit. So lesson learned, we're gonna come back to our stencil, do our blessed, and then do the and sign last. So just like we did with our thankful, I am moving the blessed up just a little bit so that it just kind of kisses against that little banner border that we have. I'm gonna tape it down and then come back in, do my 3 layers of swirling, and then it'll be time to foil. So one thing that I am running across is there are a couple leaves on this project. When we were up in Thankful, they didn't really come into play. However, now, as we are into Bless, this stem is really close to the D, so we are going to bring in our multi-masker, pick an edge that is large enough to cover that stem, and then stencil around it so we don't get any bleeding under or any ghosting. I will show you quickly how to fix that because I did have to do it on the first time when I painted this project. So here is what the ghosting looks like. See how there's a little bit of a blue on each side here? You can also see with this B, it's a little raised and it's not very precise. If you look at the B compared to the D, the B's a little wonky. I did not wipe off my brush enough here. There was too much paint on my brush. You can see some swirls. You can see that it wasn't precise. But by the time that I got to my D, I'd gotten enough paint off my brush that I was still able to keep that clean. So I'm going to go back into my click eraser. I'm going to put my click eraser back in my water, dab it off over here on my paper towel, and then come over and magically erase the spots where I ghosted. To get a little bit more paint here, a little bit more water to get this paint off. And there we go. There are no more ghosting spots. So I am gonna put my stencil back down and get one more layer on Blessed. So the beauty of being able to take off the stencil is that you can take it off and fix it. However, the curse that I was always scared of was that I was going to not be able to line it up again properly. And then I was going to have an even bigger mess and issue with having some of my letters wonky. So that is something that you are going to want to take into account. There she is. When you are fixing mistakes and moving stencils, is that you do want to be able to get it placed back exactly where you had it. And that does get easier as you do it, and it does get easier as you have more layers done because you're going to be able to tell exactly where you have already painted. Okay, so we are done with the blue. I'm gonna put the blue in the bucket and pull this off here, and voila, we have our thankful across the top, our blessed across the bottom, and now it is time to get into our foiling. So I'm gonna look here at my and sign. You can either pull out your T-square again to line this up, or you can eyeball it, whatever you feel most comfortable with. I kind of have my T's and my B's lined up, so I know that my stencil is straight. And I think I'm gonna put it right there in the center. I'm going to grab my sheets of foil. This one came on a roll. I'm actually going to cut a couple of pieces off here. This is super bright. It's kind of blinding even. But how foil works is we will put down an adhesive through our stencil. We have a video where we tested several different adhesives, tried them out, and we tell you which ones we like best, which I'm also going to show you. But you'll put your adhesive down, and then you will put your foiling sheet down, and then the adhesive pulls the foil off to bring it to your project. So I'm going to use this, I'm going to use a new piece to start. You are going to measure it to how big it is, which is about the size of my hand. I am going to cut this piece off. Some of them come in sheets. This one comes in a little bit of a roll, which is also kind of cool. So our next thing we're going to do is grab our adhesive. The adhesive we are going to use today is called Aleene's Foiling Glue. We do offer this on our website. I'm gonna put it down on our palette paper, and it looks like glue when you first put it out. Then we're gonna come back into our ink sweeper or our jumbo dauber, whichever one you like and prefer. The ink sweeper is the only one that I have an extra one of right now. Going to come here, put some of the foiling glue on my ink sweeper, and just like when I am painting, I'm going to offload. However, this time I'm just going to offload right on my palette paper, and then I can come back and grab some of that if I wish. Then we're coming to our project, and unfortunately, since we have white glue on an off-white background, it is kind of hard to see where we have glued. And when you're doing this on a darker background, you can also tell a little bit better when it is dry, because when you originally put it down, it's going to be white, just like the glue on our palette. However, when it dries, then it turns a little more transparent and clear. So I am noticing a lot of pull from the glue is picking up the stencil. So I'm gonna come in here and be a little bit more careful with my fingers. Fingers are getting a little sticky, but that's okay. I'm gonna come through here, do a second layer. You can tell with your stencil where you have applied the sticky. You might have to look around a little bit, but you can see that there is sticky on your stencil if that helps you to see where you have put it and maybe where you haven't. I'm going to immediately put this in the bucket one more time. So I'm going to pull this off. You can see that this does have the sticky on it. It is still a little wet, but it looks good. I can see it's got a little bit of a raised texture here. And I'm going to come into my foil, and this is like the most satisfying part. I'm gonna lay the foil down across my project, and then I'm just gonna rub it in. You do not want to use your fingernail when you are doing this, because it will actually scratch the foil off rather than help apply it. So I'm just rubbing my finger through here. You can see, you might not be able to see, I can see where it's pulling off here. And we are going to do a nice big reveal, and voila, that is super cool. I love the effect that this does on our project. So if there's a spot that you feel that you want to add some more, maybe it didn't get enough, you're just gonna go to another spot on your paper and move it around. Maybe you just missed it when you were rubbing it in. Maybe there's one spot that's really bold and some other spots that aren't as bold. And you can use as much of this sheet as you can and just move it around. And as long as there is rose gold or gold foil on your paper, then you can get it on your project. So we have several videos on gold foiling, how to use them with borders. We could have gold foiled this. We could have gold foiled the whole project. We just really like adding a little bit of pop and giving you guys some ideas on how to do your projects differently if you feel like you're getting into a rut with just painting and stenciling on wood surfaces. All right, I think that I am good to go. Let me show you these side by side. This was our original. I'm gonna move it to the side. This was our original. It's got a little bit of a foil. This is our new one. And I can tell a major difference in how bold that gold is. And it really just adds a pop and texture to your project. I'm going to do a number 44. Grab a polyfoam brush, and then you can also use your multi-masker here, depending on how far down or how you want that stem painted. And you could also get really creative with this, and you could, dry brush it kind of like we're doing now, where you don't get a lot of paint on there and it be a little bit more rustic looking. I do have some buffalo plaid peeking through, so I might do a couple of layers here. You could add a little bit with a round brush and do some little like nooks and crannies and crevices, just whatever you like for your project to kind of finish this off here. Could also use it a little bit in this area as a dauber, like we had been caping up against this multi-masker. And if you don't like the straight edge here, you can also just kind of feather that in down to your project so that it kind of has more of that rustic look. So when you're sanding small areas, I'm happy with how the rest of it looks. I don't want to take my entire sanding block into this project now because I want the thankful, I want the and I want the blessed to be really bold. So when we take off our sandpaper and add new sandpaper, we have a video on that for you. We save the edges that are underneath here that haven't been used yet. We put them in a little bucket, and these are really good for digging into small spaces. You can just wrap it around your finger here, and then you have just a little bit to be able to do as you wish. So I could dig in here and give it a little bit of a groove and a texture to kind of make it look more natural and rustic, like the stem of a pumpkin. All right, so then that kind of now feels like the vibe of the rest of our project. When we originally did this, we're like, you know what? It is really beautiful. We love everything about it. However, it's missing something. So we got into our tote of ribbon. We have a ton of ribbon here. We try to buy them for all seasons just because we never know what we're going to want to add. So for this one, I used this really chunky piece of orange. I cut it in half. I used the smaller piece of the burlap ribbon. And then I just cut some little triangles out of it so that it has that finished feel. I'm gonna go ahead and do that to these pieces just to show you how quick that you can add these onto your project. Turn around. I was actually a little worried when everyone started talking about needing a ribbon because bows are not my specialty. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm gonna be able to do that. So I was able to make a little flat ribbon here. So I just got a little wire. I'm putting it around the back. I'm gonna just bend it a little bit because I want to keep that tan on top here. And we are going to make sure it's in the middle, twist it a couple of times, wrap it around, and then I have a super fun trick for you for adding your bow. I don't know about you, but I have a hard time making decisions on finishing projects. If I feel like it's a final decision, I don't really want to do it because I like to change my decor. I'm one of those people that, like, every time I dust, I change some of my decor. So I decided that I would add a command strip to the back of my ribbon. So we have command strips. That's how we hang our projects. We have a video on how to hang our projects, and I'm gonna add it right here to where my ribbon goes. I'm gonna stack up another piece here, and I'm gonna put it right on top. There you go. And then now you can change it around if you wish. And then we also have, if you would decide you wanted something a little bit more, we have a lot of little leaves. You could hang some leaves down from your ribbon, make them a little 3D, use this wire, make them pop out. You can craft and design and DIY to your heart's content, but stenciling definitely makes it easier.